How y'all doing? I'm Tom. I'm alcoholic. I guess first I need to get the stuff out of the way. My sobriety date is December 4th. Whenever December 4th happened last time, I had 32 years and I ain't drunk or nothing since then. I was born in El Paso, Texas, and my home group is Happy Destiny in Durham. We meet on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock and Thursdays at 7 o'clock, where I should be now at my big book study. But, you know, when you ask to speak, you get to bail out on your home group, you know, kind of. So, but anyways, and I've got a sponsor, and I got some guys I sponsor. And so that's the basics out of the way. I kind of got to laugh. This is, you know, I usually come to this group about once a year. You know, it used to be Tom or Wallace, you know, or Daniel, sometimes or Steve, you know, but I was thinking about, you know, y'all reading the preamble up here. I heard both Tom and Wallace roll in their graves when y'all read people instead of men and women. You know, it says right in that thing, you know, no controversy, we don't get into anything, but then you get into it when you change it, you know, but, you know, things change, you know, but I'm just glad all I had to be was a drunk when I walked in here, you know. I mean, we heard somebody rich, whatever, it doesn't matter who you are, you know. And thank God there wasn't any requirements except for me wanting to be sober, you know. Y'all didn't care that I had, you know, was wanted in a bunch of states, you know, different things like that, you know. Y'all just want to know that I have a desire to quit drinking, you know. So, God's going to kick in a little bit, I hope. But anyways, like I said, I was born in El Paso, Texas, because my old man was in the Army back then. You know, back then, kind of everybody put a couple years in, you know, and then either stuck with it or went and did their own thing. So I was born there, but I basically grew up out there, kind of between like Morrisville and Carpenter. You know, Apex was kind of the closest town or Cary, and now it's all, I don't even recognize none of it. But so that's basically where I come up. You know, I do not remember the first drink of liquor I ever took. You know, I can't remember. It hadn't come back to me yet, you know. I don't remember anything before liquor. I just, you know, remember drinking. But through 5 steps and a lot of time, what I can come up with is the first kind of recollection I can think of about liquor. And like the house I come up in, there was a lot of commotion, and it was always around. And so a little kid running around, you know, if I took a beer or something out of the ice box or something and drunk it, nobody said nothing. But what I remember, my earliest recollection that's come back to me so far, is there'd be people, you know, partying at the house all the time, and like, you know, I don't know why they did it, but like, you know, little kid, you know, 5 and 6 come walking through, you know, and get handed a bottle or something. And, you know, I'd turn up a bottle of bourbon or something, you know, whatever they were drinking. And, you know, sometimes they say, you know, somebody pat you on the back and say, look, he drinks that like a man, you know. And that made me feel, I guess, a part of, I don't really know. But, I mean, you know, just that. But the funny thing is my memory goes from that thing. You could also, 5 minutes later in that same room, you know, get backhanded across the room, you know, because I come up in the world where, like, kids were to be seen and not heard, you know. And so I would hide from that when it got real violent in the house. I'd go through the woods, you know, not real far, you know, 1/4 mile in the woods, and have me a little place. And, you know, so my earliest recollection was wanting to be a part of this stuff and then hiding from it, you know, all at the same time. So that's got to be alcoholic, you know, concept, you know. So, you know, obviously for me, getting alcohol was, it was never a hard thing, you know. The little bit I went to school, you know, I kind of tripped out because other people were like, you can get, you know, booze and stuff, you know. I'm like, well, yeah, you know. I mean, I could even remember going to the town of Morrisville, which was a little ways away, and I don't even know why I remember that tonight, but like, I'd ride a horse over there, and like it was a state store, not a liquor house, but a state store. And I found out years later, like they sold more booze from that little place than any ABC store in North Carolina. And it's a little bitty place. When you walk, you don't even go in the store, you walk up to the counter and you tell them what they want and they go back and bring it to you. Well, I knew all I had to do was go up there and like tell them old man wants a bottle, because sometimes I would get one for him, but they'd never say no, say I'm getting a bottle for the old man. I'd ride the horse up there and ride him back, But, there was corn liquor around and stuff like that. But, like I said, in my family, there was my mama, my daddy, my little brother, and me. That's my family. And if you hear something in this story, I've heard people say, if you grow up in a certain kind of environment, of course you're going to be an alcoholic or a thief or whatever. And that's just a bunch of old hogwash. Because my little brother lived in the same household I did. And I was out of there around 15, never went back, he stayed till like I come back and found mama when I got sober. He was still there, and he ain't alcohol. He never was alcoholic. I ain't say he's 100% right, but he's all right, we get along, we have a relationship now. But, so it's not the environment you grow up in or whatever, and I don't know. I never worried myself about, what made me an alcoholic or not. A lot of doctor's opinion helps a lot of people. Oh, wow, To me, it was a matter of like one of the old sayings, it doesn't matter how the mule got in the ditch, get it out. It doesn't matter how you're alcoholic or what made you. Do you want to do something different, And, that's just the way it was for me, I hear a lot of people say, well, I never wanted to grow up and be like my uncle or some old drunk somebody knew, and then they said, well, I turned out just like that. Well, me, that's what I strived for when I was little. I thought that's what growing up being a man was, the person that, I was used to seeing people, passed out on the floor when I got up to go to school, step over them, and that impressed me, them guys that get up, knock back a swallow of whiskey to get going on, and get up, and it was like, the people that were the most violent, I thought that's what growing up being a man was, man, that could drink the most liquor, chase the most women, the kind of person that when you went into the bar, that person walks in and everybody kind of makes sure their piece is handy, when that certain person walks in and everybody says, you don't want to mess with him, And so those are the things that I strived for those things, when those people said I didn't try to, but I thought that's what life was about, so, and I would run away from home. I guess it wasn't really running away from home. I'd just disappear, for a month or two, go just stay in somebody's barn or, on their couch or off in a barn or something, but I could always tuck tail and come back home. Mama was never going to turn me out, and I guess I went to 1 week of school in the 7th grade. I couldn't read then, but like they kicked me out for the rest of the year. Said I couldn't come back. Now they said I could go some kind of thing, but I just never went back, All I was doing when I went to school was dealing some drugs and, stuff like that, even at that age. But, so I just never went back to school. Now, at the moment they kicked me out from school, I don't remember sitting there thinking like, I love alcohol so much, or I'd rather live the way I want to live and do what I want to do and chase that booze than have an education. It didn't like spring on my mind that way, but that's exactly what I did. I gladly, traded my love for alcohol, traded my education for it. I hear a lot of people come up here and I lost my family, I lost my son, I said, you ain't lose nothing. Alcohol was more important to you than your family, your son, or whatever. You didn't lose none of that. You gladly traded it for alcohol, you know. That's my experience. And, you know, if I work with somebody, I said, how'd you lose them? You know, if you lose something, I remember it might have been Tom, you know, well, talking about, I lost my license. You ain't lost your license. They're in a file drawer up there in downtown Raleigh. You know, you ain't lose them. You give them up because alcohol was more important to you than your driving privilege, you know. And that's a lot of things, these old timers, you know, they made me accountable for everything. I never have been the one that, like, even as rum dum when I got here, I never was like, oh yeah, I drank because this or that. I mean, I just drank. You know, the first time Joe took me through that book, the only thing that made sense in that whole book was men and women drink because they like the effects of alcohol, basically. And I was like, that means they like to get drunk, right? Joe said, that's close enough for you, boy. I was like, yeah, I understand that, you know. And so it was just, you know, kind of what I did. You know, I didn't mind paying the consequences of it, you know. Being underage, you can get away with a lot more than, you know, once you hit a certain age, you know. And so right after I got kicked out of 7th grade, you know, like I said, I'd leave for months and come back, and but this was the last time I ever stayed at home, and I had been in a real bad car wreck. I was getting DWIs way before I was even legal to have a license, you know. I mean, get a car, you drive it, you know. I mean, you know, you're going to bust me, okay. You can't take my license, buckwheat, I ain't got one. You know, what you going to do, big boy, you know. I mean, that's the attitude. I mean, it's crazy to think about that now, but, you know, it's like, you can't take my license, I ain't got none, you know. I ain't even old enough, you know, I ain't legal enough to drink. I got locked up one time for contributing to delinquency of minors, and like, they were like 3 years older than me. Something ain't right with that, but, you know, and that was just in Apex, you know. In Apex, you know, you could just walk yourself out, you know, if they knew you, kind of thing. I mean, but anyways, it was different a long time ago, you know, because a lot of them guys back there, they weren't very legal type people anyway, because through my old man and stuff, I knew a lot on them, you know. It's funny, a friend of mine like Blair, his mama was dating Big Al. And so, like, you know, and Al was, you know, I can say it because he was old, drunk, and everything else, you know. But, like, so Blair's mama, if he was over at the house and we were there, we'd do what we wanted in the house, you know, because that's his mama's house, you know, smoke weed in front of him and whatever. Boy, I'll catch y'all out there out of this property, I'm going to get you. Like, you ain't going to do, you know. But, you know, and I'm sure he allowed that because he was a drunk. I mean, we stole his car one time and robbed the store. Like, not really I hadn't got into real robbing yet, but like, he's passed out, so we steal his, not the car, but the station wagon, go over to Cary, and what I call stealing back then was we'd go in there and we'd like fill up 2 carts with all the beer, you know, and as you get into the door, hey, come back, you know, F you, catch me if you can, and we'd run out there and start throwing it all in the car and take off, you know. I mean, there wasn't a lot they could really do, but that time we did it with that time. Blair was driving, he took off, squealing tires out of there, and the transmission dropped out right as we curved out there, man. And I mean, maybe a half mile down the road, and so we jumped out. It was time to DD-MI, and we're like throwing a bunch of cases off in the woods over in the ditch. And then, of course, you know, we DD-MI'd, you know, because we knew Cary law was coming. And of course, you know, I mean, how does, you know, that guy go back and explain to his superiors, you know, your car was used in a robbery and left beside the road, you know, but we could care less what trouble Al got in over that, you know, as long as, you know, we got away, you know. So it's like, that's the mentality I had, you know, where, you know, nothing really mattered, you know. But at 15, I had been in not a bad car wreck because I'm still here, but I was broke up and my left leg was in a body cast like that. My leg was stiff out and the body, it come up around my hips, and so I could, walk like Frankenstein. And my little brother, and he's 2 years younger than me, I was all liquored up, and, probably at that point in time, if I'd have just sit still for 20 minutes, I'd have gone ahead and passed out anyway. But, I still had this bottle, and he took it away from me. He didn't want to see me getting, trouble, or, he didn't like to see the things, that happened around my drinking. And, and he was scared at the time, and I was just mad because he took, wouldn't let me got my bottle, and I was like, and so he wound up getting the rifle out. It was only the 22, and he was like, go on, you don't need this. And I was like, you ain't got the, what to pull the trigger, you weak SOB. And then he shot me. And it wasn't really, he shot me in my right foot, the good one. And so, now literally before that, like I said, I couldn't walk. He could have escaped me at just a fast clip walk, but he, just the violence he's seen around the house and stuff, he wanted to see me, some kind of another thing, a jackpot happened to me again, and was looking out for his brother. But anyways, and when he did that, I was like, man, I know I can't get him bottom now, but I thought he was weak. He wasn't like the old man, so as soon as he hit me in the foot, I knew it was that, but I knew I couldn't catch him. So I grabbed my gut and acted like I was gut shot, like I was bad hit, And however you are, at that age, I don't know years and dates really that much, but this is what my full intention was at that time, was he's weak. He'll be upset that he hurt me, and he'll come over to see how bad I'm hit. And when he does, I'll grab him around his neck. Because all I wanted was to finish that bottle. And he didn't. But, how messed up is your life from alcohol where something like that happens and you're thinking about throttling your brother around the neck just to get that bottle, And I would have if he'd have come up there. But anyways, he went through the woods and told a neighbor, and then I knew something was coming, the law was coming, but I wasn't sure if he'd tell or something, but I figured he'd come back. So I was waiting for that little SOB. And I had the 30-30 then, and but then the meat wagon come down. We lived on about 1.25 miles gravel road, and people, there was only 3 houses and 1 shack down that road, and people didn't come down there, didn't have business down there. But and actually, the meat wagon got there first. It was before some of that stuff, and the law was behind them. And I don't remember if it was JD or Big Al that come with the law. But when the meat wagon got there, I told them, man, you trespassing. You got to get out of here, man. Ain't nothing for you here. And they was like, man, And so I wasn't shooting at them. But every time they try to step out of that ambulance, I'd shoot down it by the door into rocks, and they'd freak out. And I don't know. I was hurting then, and I don't remember if it was Big Al or JD, but it was the same one. They said, come on, man, this was called in as a homicide, it's kind of serious, and at times they'd be chasing me for robbing the stores like that or something in the car, and I'd chase them all over town. They knew where I lived, but this time I just, I didn't feel like doing nothing. I said, they know I wasn't going to hurt nobody. I said, yeah, let's go, and I just figured they was going to take me to the hospital and patch me up and turn me loose. Well, from there they took me, instead of, Apex had a hospital, but it was a little thing. And all the Yankees had moved down and took over Cary and stuff, so there weren't hospitals there. And Raleigh was the closest place to go to a good hospital with, and stuff, but I ain't bad shot. But they take me all the way over to Chapel Hill, which is, pretty good spell further. And I'm thinking, why are they doing this, And I found out once they got me loaded up in there, they patched up my foot and took me up to the 4th floor of the nut ward up there. They had a little nut ward up at the Chapel Hill Hospital. And I had been stuck in Butner for a couple years for my violence and stuff at a younger age. I think I went in at about 8. I talked to Ball Bad about it, and he wasn't really sure, but it was, for a couple of years I was there, for my violence and drinking. But, so they had me in there, and I just was raising Cain, talking about, man, you got the wrong person. That's like, you need to lock my little brother up. I was like, the bullet, y'all left the bullet in my foot. There's proof, It's like, you got the wrong man, you got to cut me loose, man. I ain't done nothing. Well, they didn't cut me loose right then. That, I don't know if it, but some of y'all know about it. You got to lock down on 72 hours, and stuff like that, And so I was just as good as Mother Teresa, trying to be for that couple of 3 days, And they come and they had it was like a hearing, but, And so back in North Carolina, people smoked inside then, And so there was a table up there with a couple of the main psychobabblers that had been talking with me, and my whole family was there, mom and brother, and they let everybody tell why little Junior needed, why I needed to be locked up, and that I was a danger to myself and others. And I just remember telling them, well, he's the one that shot me. You need to lock him up. I was like, hey, you've locked the old man up before for shooting somebody. Why didn't you lock him up, And they had the right person. It just took me to get my first 4 step to realize it. And so basically, the guy, in my mind, he smirked, said it like a smart aleck, when I wanted him to give me a sentence, you're going to be stuck here, 6 months, 90 days, or we're going to send you to Butner or whatever. And when I said, well, how long I got to stay? He says, kid, you ain't even got a right to appeal till you're 18. We can do whatever I'm sure he didn't cuss, but whatever we want to. So I'm not shackled or nothing, so I'm like, you can only hang a horse thief once. And I was so good in there, man. Sugar wouldn't have melted in my mouth. I was, I knew how to play the game. And so when they said, there wasn't nothing I could do, and so I jumped up to where that table was and grabbed that big glass square ashtray and that main psychobabber. I went to smacking him in the head with it, trying to put the corner of it through the temple of his head. And this ain't Dix Hill, so I don't know where them big Pulpwood guys come out, but they had some kind of security to come and drug me out of there. Now, as they drugged me out, it's the only word I kept to my family. I told them, F you, you ain't my kin no more. How dare you, do that to me? And, they locked me up. I let myself out in a couple of days. I wasn't supposed to be out, but it wasn't a gun camp or Constantine wired up. It's just the Chapel Hill Hospital, So I let myself out about 3 or 4 days, when I could walk good. And I remember this. I come down, and again, as this stuff's going on, and they're hauling me off, and I'm telling my family, F you, you're not my kin no more. I don't remember thinking, I'd rather drink liquor than have a family. But that's the choice I made right then and there, never talked to them again. And I remember it's a funny feeling, because I would try to do good a little bit for my mama, but not really, But so when I left, I got out and I'm hitchhiking. After a while, I get up on the road and I'm on where 54 and 55 highway meets. And if you turn right, you go back towards, the Apex area or something. I remember getting kind of that crossroad and just thinking, it don't matter which way I go, north, south, east, or west, because I ain't got nothing to live up to no more. There ain't, I'm just alone, and, and I got really, stuff went, I got a lot more violent and crazy and along with that because I didn't feel I had anything to live up to. And so I went towards Apex and stayed at a local liquor house over there. If anybody's from around that area, back Otis Mills, used to make good corn liquor. Him and there was Percy Flowers, made a lot of it too, but his wasn't good, and he sold it all up north, made a lot of money, but Otis was more of a local guy. So hung out there, and but I was, that was kind of a devastating thing. It kind of shook me a little bit. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to straighten myself out. So after I partied there for a while, and sponged off everybody, Tom and brother shot him, that kind of stuff, I decided I was going to do right. So I stole a pick-em-up truck and a bunch of carpentry tools and went down to Florida to be a carpentry man and be on the straight and narrow, and I did a lot of stuff. I mean, I was even dealing drugs up at NC State, as a kid, and I was going into they didn't have a lot. They weren't really strip joints up there, but they were like beer bars, and they were just topless up there. And then Smiley's had a biker bar and then a pool hall. And so I knew all these people that used to run like my apartment and them up there. And so I'd go up there and I was dealing drugs, they was getting a cut, and they'd be like, yeah, but just, go back with the girls if you don't drink something. Don't drink out there in the thing, because they're always looking for IDs up in Collegeville, but, so I thought I was even at that age, I thought I was growed up. And I remember, talking about, oh man, you get twice as much for them college punks, they got their mama's money and they're too dumb to know the difference, and so that's what but that's just kind of just the way it was. But it was kind of local stuff. I'd never been on the streets of Raleigh. I mean, yeah, something happened, pass out and get up next day and go home or something. But when I would disappear, I'd be in the woods or in the country. I didn't know nothing about no city life. So I hit down, and far as I got was Orlando. And, I didn't know how to hot wire the truck just right and burn it up by the time I got down there. You're supposed to do something different. I did a lot of stuff, but I wasn't much on that. And so I started, I wanted to start working at first. So I started working day labor. It was $17.50 for an 8-hour ticket, at that time. And I was living in the flocks, and they was $5 a night. And if you could get a week for $25, but for me it was just $5 a day. You couldn't, you just never had enough to or I didn't, And at the time on that, when I first started, I was mostly just drinking liquor some when I could get it, but it just wasn't enough money. So I was drinking a lot of Carlinsberg Black Label. And the only reason I remember it's Carlinsberg Black Label because it was the cheapest beer you could get. And at the mom and pop stores, the convenience stores, it was 98 cents a six pack, or 97 or 98 or something. Because I can remember, you give them $1, and they give you two or three pennies back. And I was just belligerent, I was just take my effing dollar, you idiot. And sometimes I dump the pennies back at them or something, and a lot of times they just kind of took it. Other times somebody would take offense to that and we'd go at it, But I was broke every day. Sometimes I was in the flop, sometimes I couldn't even be there. And I remember all right, they got liquor laws different down there, kind of like in Atlanta, but you can buy liquor out of places that ain't state run. I mean, you go in the bar and drink liquor and buy a half gallon and walk out the bar. I mean, kind of liquor house. So I was in this one place, a little bar up there on Orange Blossom Trail, and drinking my 50-cent shots till I run out of money. But I'd already seen where they had the bottles, pretty easy access to the door, like I would have if it was back home in Apex in the first, I drunk all my 50-cent shots, and it's time to go. So I grabbed me a bottle and deed him out the door, And man, it was a lady cop too. Cop walking the beat, and the guy's hollering at the thing, and I'm like I would have done back home, F you, and I seen the cop, and he hollered, stop, and I'm like, F you, catch me if you can, and I start running, and all of a sudden, I heard a shot, and I was pissed me off, because I dropped my bottle then, and I was she wasn't shooting at me, she shot one up in the air, and I stopped, and then she come over there and locked me up got out real quick. But I was like, man, what, it wasn't like somebody I knew, I mean, to them, that was like a real robbery. Um, but they didn't know me from Adam, and it's just like, wow, so I learned some hard lessons about the street. And I knew about anonymity before I come here. I knew all about anonymity, because I didn't let nobody know who my real name was. I wasn't even sure how old I was when I got sober because I hadn't used a real name. I had never really used my real name, I mean, all my life. But like, after going, they had the strip clubs down there on Orange Blossom Trail was real strip clubs. I mean, they got naked and they served liquor. It was like a real bar and stuff. And associates of the old man owned and run them places. And, after a while, I kind of, your old man's square, this and that. And so, and I thought, because of who I am, that these guys are giving me a privilege, So I started out, my first jobs working for them was like basically to rob drug dealers, and at that time I wasn't flying any colors, so I was given whatever piece I wanted, a hot piece. And sometimes it'd be by myself, sometimes with somebody else. And there'd be usually a cocaine deal set up. And my job was to go there and come back with the cocaine. And, I didn't have no money to start with, And, again, they didn't care if I come back or not. I ain't even associated with them yet. If I don't show up, they ain't lost nothing. If I do, they hit a lick, And the funny thing about it was, I watched people die beside me and people in front of me. And, it didn't register. It was exciting and fun. I mean, to be honest with you. And like, there were times, and it's just insane, because like the people I was fixing to rob, there was times where they didn't have no product and I didn't have no money and we're out here shooting at each other, trying to beat each other and ain't nobody got nothing, so it's like, but I survived those things, and went up, and I guess what I mostly did for most of my life traveling, and I never stayed in one place long, just couldn't afford to, but like I guess I say I was real good at finding people. If you needed somebody to disappear or be found, I learned ways to do that, just like if say I had to find Daniel, well, I can't find Daniel, he's on the road, but he's more of a civilian, he's got an old lady. I'll go over there and do something real nasty to his old lady or something, he'll show up. These are the skills I learned to survive and find people. I did it in-house, out-of-house. It didn't matter to me. I had no loyalty to any colors, I mean, a free operator, so that's basically what I did. But, it's on and up. Never done much time in prison, pulled a couple of years. That wasn't even under my real name. I didn't get a Social Security till I got sober. When I was born, you either got a job at 18 or like when you went into the military, you got a Social Security number. So I had to go like, part of making amends, never paid tax in my life. Went up to them at their amends and I said, you got to be honest with them. I said, well, what have you done, to live? I said, basically, I've just robbed people or, dealt drugs and dealt a lot of weapons, and I don't know what it is. I was 28 when I got sober, and it was probably about 29, probably about a year later when I started doing that. And they come up with some kind of mathematical formula that if you, a white male, 28, living in this part of the country, it takes this much to live on. And they definitely had a number that I owed them, and I think it was just a little over 6 years I got right with them, But, those were little things, I've seen, my sponsor and other people were showing me how to do these things. I remember truck driver John at Hayes Bar, and I sit next to him every Monday, and like he was sober longer than I've been alive. I was tripping out, Now, Quiet Brian I could relate to because he was 6 months ahead of me, and Quiet Brian helped me up. Now, John, that was just poppycock. But, I kind of, But anyways, John said that, like, when he got sober, he was in debt like $1.5 million because he owned one of them bars up there in College Town, the Wolf's Den. And people for NC State people that they wasn't like the strip clubs or nothing, and like he had run it into the ground and owed all the distributors and stuff. His wife kind of kept it going after he retired from a truck driver. So when John got sober, he run that bar for 7 years till he paid off every debt he had to all his distributors, and then walked away from it. And I didn't know nothing like that, but when I sitting every night with the man that said that's what he did to stay sober, that's like, wow, I mean, I didn't come from the school where it said, oh, just go file bankruptcy. You're stealing again if you do that. You ain't paying the debt you owe. That's just been my experience. The guys wouldn't let me get away with stuff like that. It's like, yeah, you can file bankruptcy. It's legal, but it ain't. We live by a better code than that. That's what y'all taught me. And like, when I come in, and it wasn't just my sponsor, who was the first person I ever had a real relationship. It was the whole community of people. Hoss and Tom, and Wally, I mean, all over. But like, I was going through the steps, and they were teaching me all kinds of other lessons, stuff like, boy, we ain't coming down to your level. If you want to stay sober, you're going to come up to our level, and, it was just straight up like that. And I was desperate enough at the time, and I knew something was wrong. Right, when these people would talk to me, I would do what they said. I was that desperate when I got here, and it has worked out, But so I drank on like that, and just, I drink myself down where I'd be holed up somewhere. It might be in a building or something, and like literally, I'd get stuck there for a couple months, and say if this church was abandoned or something, I might find that quarter there. And literally live there for a couple of months and get liquor brought in and somehow get liquored. But I mean, I'd get to a point where I wouldn't even get up from there, not to use the bathroom or puke or anything. I'd just lay in a corner like that, and then I'd be, skin and bones and yeller, and something would happen and I'd get thrown back in a bug house or something, and then like they get meat on my bones or something, and I'd con my way out of there again, and I'd be back to that point of just drink myself down to oblivion, And I remember one time sitting there, and it's kind of stupid the things that come back. Like, I was somewhere in like a shed, and it was like, I come to, and it was a good day because I still had a bunch of liquor, And so I was, another couple of swallows just to go pass out and just be comfortably numb, like Pink Floyd said. Of course, he's talking about heroin and that thing, but and I seen the sun out there, right? And I didn't know whether the sun was going down or coming up. And why that mattered right at that minute, I don't know. But I was like, man, don't pass out. I just want to see if it's a new day coming, or if it's the start of a day or the end of the day, which made no difference to me the way I was living, But at that time, I remember trying to stay up to see which way it went, and I didn't make it, because I'm drinking and I passed out. But little spots of odd things like that will come back to you, or did me. When I stopped drinking, it was funny. That's the curse of getting sober. Things come back, man. I ain't got liquor to hide from them no more, But so basically it was just like that. And I stopped doing the heavy crime, what I considered heavy crime. I wasn't shooting dope or anything else. And now I've done it all. The only thing I ain't done on purpose is Thorazine. And I've done enough of that IV in the places where that shit where that stuff freaks me out, man. I know people do it as a drug today but anyways, I'm not I'm an alcoholic. I'm not a junkie that drank liquor, I'm an alcoholic that did, dope and stuff on the way. And there's a big difference. And if you want to talk to me after the meeting, I'll be glad to tell you my experience on that. I could put all that stuff away. I'm sucking, Jim Beam by the half gallons. But, I could get off that stuff. Liquor, I couldn't. I couldn't do that. When I was 28, I come back and let my mama know I was alive. We had to go through a bunch of legal stuff because there was a body that was meant to be me that she really thought it was a charred up thing, and I allowed her to believe that was me. So they would quit, feds would quit coming by like on holidays. I never understood them stupid people like criminals. When you're a criminal, like you would go back to your old lady's house or your mom's house. Like, how stupid can you be? Of course they're going to check there a couple times a year, but, and I thought, if Mama thought I was gone, she wouldn't worry anymore. I found out, doing my forfeit, when I eventually got to my brother, and see, when I say I hated my brother, I mean I hated him. And the reason I hated my little brother is he ratted me out all the time. And what that meant to me was Mama over there bawling and crying. And my brother, if he wouldn't rat me out and tell the trouble I'm getting into and the bad things I'm doing, my mama wouldn't cry. Couldn't go to my head if I wasn't living the way I was living, my mama wouldn't cry. It was my brother's fault, not my fault. If he wouldn't rat me out, Mama wouldn't be upset. So when I said, I hated him, I mean that, I'll probably forget this, but so I'll say it now. When I got sober, Mama was there, it's almost 5 years, he didn't want nothing to do with me, So after a while, about once a year, I'd ask Mama, will he talk, because, I'm not allowed to make my amends just to clear my conscience and mess somebody else up, and so I tried a little bit, and then it got to be every year, and finally said, well, yeah, he wants to talk to you. And so I went to my little brother, and I told him how I hated him, and, that I was sorry I was not any kind of a brother to him, and, I had to sit down there and ask him what I could do to make this right if I ever can, and he freaking blew me away. He told me all he knew to do was tell him no, because he seen his big brother who he looked up to killing himself and didn't know what to do to help him. And he said he always loved me and looked up to me, and I thought he hated me. That's the burden he had. He was trying to save his brother. When he shot me all this stuff, and that I had no idea because I didn't care. Alcohol was more important, in anything in my life. That's just the way it was. I had no clue, and that just blew me away when he told me that. And it's funny, I say this real quick. So he does all kinds of crazy stuff, climbs mountains. He also races motorcycles too, like I do, but different kind. So at the time, he was cleaning them high rises in Raleigh, and we met. So the second time we got together and talked, and he said, you ever repelled? I was like, nah. He says, well, I'm cleaning. It was one of the taller ones in Raleigh, I think 15 or 16 stories, not like the big one, but that's way on up there. And so he's cleaning the window. He said, well, I'll show you how to rappel. And, so it's on this thing that goes around, and, I know how to tie rock rope. So you get over there, you go over the edge, and then you just let it out, and you can go a long ways if you want. And I had a little slip knot. There's a safety thing in case I freaked out. I would be stuck up there. And so as I'm like this, about ready to get going, I was like, ooh, I hope he really forgive me, because, I'm hanging on a rope, and all he got to do is give it a whack, and I'm done. But, it was fun, and then, I got to, I'll do that again. So go up to the lobby, he says, done it like 3 times. Can't be doing that no more. We ain't supposed to be, going down and coming back up every 5 minutes. You're going to get me fired. But so we were able to do a few things together. Not a lot, later on, he become more, but I should have never had any of my family back. My mama just passed, and all she knew was this program give her son back. And, she'd been sick for the last few years, so I didn't really see her much at all, because I would get a call from her old man, not my old man, but the one, and he'd say, Mama's in the hospital again. She don't want nobody to F with her, And I understand that, because that's how I am, Either I'm going to live or not, but just leave me up there in that corner, And so I didn't get to see her much, And a few times she'd be halfway good, and she'd say, okay, we'll come visit for a couple hours, and I would, I've been over there more now since she croaked to visit her old man, because he really misses my mama. I miss her too, and my old man wasn't in her life that long, but Tom been there and been there through all of it. I don't know what a relationship like that is, to be with somebody as long as he was with Mom, but he thought she was going to go first. And it didn't surprise me. I was glad she went, because she was not happy and just hurting all the time. But so I go over there more now, because now I can go over there and spend time with Tom, because he misses my mom and he needs somebody. He's all there by himself. So I laughed at the old lady the other night. I was like, man, I've been over since she's croaked, like probably more times than I've seen her, in 10 years, because that's just the way, our family is, but, she knew whenever there was a problem, she knew she picked up the phone that I would be there, and she made that known. I think the last time I seen her, besides talking to her, I went over there and had one of them insert stoves, and it hadn't been working in a couple of years. I thought, Mom, I'll get one of these. So finally I just got one at a discount at the store, and went over there and installed it, and she was happy, she said, hold on now, so I did. And then but I gotta go, and my business was, and she's like, well, I gotta pay you something for it. And Tom's over there, and I was like, nah, Mom, I said, I got it for like a couple $100. I mean, it's a $3,000 stove, but got it at discount at, they're discontinued at Lowe's. And then she's like, no, I gotta pay you. And Tom's like, yeah, we gotta. I was like, Tom, how much have I screwed her out of all my life, And it's like, he's like, well, yeah, I guess so. He said, I can't say a word to that, It's just the little things I got to try to do to pay back, But so I'm paying back my mama now by spending time with Tom, but he's always been a good guy. When I showed up back and let my mama know I was alive, who thought I was dead and had a funeral for me, she opened the door and was just glad to see her son. Now, he was there, and, she told me the old man had whatever split, and he looked at me like he should have. He should have shot me right between the F and I's. But you could tell that look of disgust, but Mama said, that's my boy. If you don't like it, you cut off, And, he put up with me a little, I come over there and stayed a little bit, and this is right before I quit drinking. And anyways, Mama, we played this game. She wasn't living there. Half the time they'd be at her house, and then they'd be at his house over there in Cary. And I get the days mixed up, so I'd be passed out with half gallon, And I'm telling Mom, well, you ought to be glad I ain't doing A, B, C, and D. I'm just drinking, it's legal. Don't mess with nobody, the world ought to, they ought to just set me up in an apartment and pay for my liquor just so I won't be a menace to society anymore, That's what I believed, and never thought about it. So we played this game like, oh, I wish you wouldn't do this, and then I'd be like, oh, I ain't gonna, or whatever. And finally when I said, Mama, look, I'll never quit drinking. I've quit everything else. You don't understand. But I will not disrespect you in your home anymore. And man, she was freaking out because she thought she'd never see me again, I said, Mama, and I was actually being a carpenter man finally, working because I didn't want to, knock heads just to drink. I said, well, I'm just moving out there to Durham with one of the boys I work with. And so she was okay with that. And it wasn't long that I made it to y'all. And it's time for me to shut down, and I apologize. I got caught up in the drunk-a-log. But if there's anybody new or coming back for the 100th time, man, I can promise you, I guarantee you, if you will come into this thing and honestly go through that book and work them steps with another man or woman or whatever, it doesn't matter, that your life will change and you don't ever have to drink again. It doesn't matter. I guarantee you that will not fail. I've seen a lot of people in the program, oh yeah, I tried it for a year or two. Hey, it didn't work for me. I was like, oh, what step were you on? Who was your sponsor? Well, yeah, you weren't in the program. You just showed up to some meetings, and, that might get you by for a while, the fellowship. But, until you have that change from going through the steps, the same man will drink again. And again, I apologize for being on a drunk-a-log and not getting sober.